I think the guy just leaned against it.
And she's going to get loud mic. She'll come back just before.
All right.
Welcome back, everybody. Reminder to everyone that we're live streaming again at MediaPost.com. So if you want to refer a colleague who's back at the home office to tune in, they can go to MediaPost.com, go to the site page, and we're streaming there. We'll also archive all of this, and we're live blogging it all. We've already talked about data, and data is sort of, as marketers are fond of saying now, the oil that greases the wheels of digital. It is also, of course, one of the touchiest subjects in all fields now, but especially within healthcare, as we've already heard. But it is also the thing that can, if done well, bring us closer to consumers, help us understand where they are and who they are, and talk to them in even more human ways, ironically. That's really the goal of data-driven marketing, is to establish much more human relationships and interactions with our patients. So CRM, gathering data, understanding and profiling customers, understanding who they are and where they are in the journey and what they need is really core to data, but it has to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. And we want to talk about the role of data and how it can drive better relationships if done well. Let me ask our panel to come forward as I introduce Hans Kaspersek, who is the President and Chief Strategist at Arteric. Hans and our panel, please welcome them.
All right, there we go. So, good morning. Welcome to another panel. Great morning already. I mean, very interesting insights that we talked about earlier. And I'm just going to do a real quick intro to my right, to my left. Dr. Gabrielle Bedewi, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay, so I'm Gabrielle Bedewi, and when I get introduced as Dr. Bedewi, I feel like I have to explain. I'm not a physician. I'm actually a statistician with a personality. And the closest I can diagnose somebody's condition is to give them their survival rate, which decreases very quickly the longer they talk to me and not a real physician. So I do, my background, I have a PhD in statistics and management sciences, and I love to work with data and making sense of it and finding those nuggets of insights, especially with segmentation, understanding customer journey, and also predictive modeling. So that's my area of focus.
Yeah, and I think when we met before this, right, you were talking about that you do a lot of international travel, you do a lot of work with not-for-profits and with interests in women's and children's issues, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my other passion.
Yeah. So, Brian, you're the CMO over at LifeBridge. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good morning.
It's on.
Oh, here we go. Okay, good. So CMO of LifeBridge Health, we're a 5-system health provider in the Baltimore, Maryland area. We have dozens of other kind of ancillary facilities, minute clinics, that kind of thing. I am relatively new to the healthcare space. Most of my background has been in retail, B2C marketing with Target, Capital One, for generally pretty big players in the space. So this is relatively, healthcare is relatively new to me, but it's very interesting because as a marketer, if you want to do something that impacts people's lives, you can sell them credit cards, you can sell them automobiles, but there's really no more impactful experience a person will have than when they're dealing with healthcare for themselves or their family. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be in this industry, and it's great to meet everybody.
Cool, thanks. And in talking to Brian before this, I learned that he's an amateur race car driver, which is, I think, very, very cool.
A very bad one, so I crashed on.
Well, at least you're crashing on the track, right, or into the cones, right?
Yeah, I don't need my own services, so
Yeah.
that's good.
That's good. Justin, you're the EVP and Managing Director at CMI Compass. Compass, you want to tell us a little bit? And you guys got some good shout-outs this morning about it?
We
Yeah?
did. Thank you,
Stuff?
Ted, from before. Absolutely. So Justin Freed from CMI Compass. We are a media strategy and buying agency as part of WPP Health and Wellness. I've been in the pharmaceutical space for about the last 6 years. And before that, I actually did a lot with health systems and actually health insurance. So I've kind of been in the health sector for quite some time. I'm looking forward to bringing you guys some insights today.
Cool. And Justin is a competitive barbecuer, and he has his own sort of style of barbecue, right? Which is Philly.
Absolutely. So if you can't tell by my size, I got into barbecuing because I really like to eat barbecue, and figured I could make it better than some of the places I was getting it from. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Chanel is Associate Director of Media down at AstraZeneca. You want to tell us a little bit about?
Sure. Chanel Morrison, Associate Media Director from EZ, which is a biopharmaceutical company, both in the primary care space, also specialty care. I sit within a group within the organization that is made up of subject matter experts, everything from social media to media strategy, content strategy, and really partnering with brand teams and marketers, as well as other centralized groups in the regulatory space to help develop strategies and everything from strategy to execution, helping brands get their campaigns into market.
Cool, thank you. I think one of the most interesting things about our panel is that a number of us came from outside healthcare, and so hopefully we're going to bring you some insights of what we did when we were outside of healthcare and maybe either less regulated industries or industries where we could be more creative or were more advanced in their use of data. And then, Chanel was on the agency side for quite a long time and has made the leap to the client side now. So I'll be interested to hear your perspectives on how you experience this differently on both sides. As a marketer myself, I got into digital marketing, founded my agency in 1999. I've been at this for quite a long time. We come at it from the software development side, and so when we're thinking about these problems, quite literally, we're trying to figure out how to apply software to the data in order to change people's lives, right? So how do we create life-changing experiences for people all the time? And what's interesting about that is, there's a number of challenges we face. One of the things that struck me, I was preparing for this panel, was a couple of years, I go to a lot of conferences, right? I'm fortunate in that. And I remember a couple of years ago, we spent almost all of our time on stage talking about all the things we couldn't do yet, right? Well, MLR won't let us do this, PACT won't let us do that, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like, to some degree, on the data stuff and on the personalization stuff and creating these sort of custom experiences for people, we're at that stage again. We're past that now on the digital side. I go to the conferences, we don't talk about all the stuff we can't do now. We've pretty much nailed that and talking about the things we can do. I think here we're running into, privacy issues, siloing issues, data, sort of aggregation and, anonymization issues. So, given that, and do you agree with that, or do you not agree with that idea? Do you see that there's a lot of resistance to personalization, and what can we do to sort of overcome that resistance?
So I think one of the things I've personally noticed over the past couple of years in the pharma space is we've gotten over a big hump. So again, as I mentioned before, I've been here about 6 years. When I started in the pharmaceutical space, there was definitely a lot of pushback. But I think just for reasons that a lot of clients have developed, some of the stuff like that Chanel's team is on at AZ, and when we got to work with her, there are people internally at these larger companies now that understand marketing, understand what data is utilized, and it's great to have an internal advocate to work across inside to speak to regulatory to get us over those humps. And so I can tell you now, most of the pharmaceutical companies and some of just the general health companies we work with now are over that hump. And are definitely now it's we have to be careful. It's not one-to-one. Justin Freed takes Nexium every single day. Sorry, I'm leaving you guys too much information here.
It's the barbecue.
Yeah, it's the barbecue. It's not that far, right? But it is a personalized message based on my behaviors, based on insights of my browsing history and who I am and what credit card information I have and what luxury brands I like or don't like. So we're definitely taking that next step now.
Yeah, and I also think, as being one of those internal advocates, it's also working with, the regulatory partners, the people that are champions and are advocates for what you're trying to do and trying to get them on your side and work on the other folks later, right? Trying to get them to come around eventually. But I do also think that there's been a change in the way that marketers think about who their customers are and even patients understanding that there's more than just a patient journey, right? There's more than just when a patient gets diagnosed to when they're on a treatment. But also that they're browsing the web. There are other things that they're doing in their journey in terms of researching their condition. And so they're more than just a patient. They're just like every one of us. I do think that having that internal advocate to get over that hump and try to change internal thinking has definitely contributed to a shift in terms of healthcare and personalization and getting smarter with the way that we advertise.
So I started my career in banking and moved on to automotive, retail, et cetera. And if you think about the changes that are going on and how the business was for banking, a lot of it is business to consumer. A lot of the decisions that the member or customer is making is their own choice. In healthcare, it's been a lot of it business to business with commercial types of plans. The relationship building, sales driven, and it's only when the member was the one starting to make that choice with individual plans, with essential plans, Medicare plans, that necessitated the way we communicate with members has to be by knowing what their needs are, what their preferences are, and turning from sales to marketing. So that's what made healthcare, the industry is a little laggard industry, but they're there now, and they see the importance of looking at that member journey, understanding the member's needs, connecting with them, not just from a marketing perspective, but also case management, customer center, trying to integrate all that information so that when they are communicating with them, when they're reaching them, when they're developing new products, they're truly understanding that member's needs. So that's why you're seeing that dependency on data and integrating data. Changing culture is still there, having to think more from a membership perspective, Member 360. A lot of the insurance companies are getting there. They're building their data hubs. They're integrating that information and then feeding marketing too, and changing from sales mentality to a marketing mentality.
So in my experience, LifeBridge Health is a multi-billion-dollar provider, and through that provider lens, they deal with the customer experience as it presents itself. So somebody walking into an ER and presenting with shortness of breath, that's how they look at the patient. So pulling somebody from the outside like myself, I find that there's a lot of interest in understanding what the customer journey is, but that's about where the level of knowledge stops. So they're looking to understand that customer journey, preceding the visit to the ER, after the treatment, post-treatment, and ongoing care, but they don't necessarily know what that means or how to activate it or how to stand up that structure. So that they know that they're lagging and deficient in certain areas, but they don't quite know what that means. They don't know how a customer record on Salesforce or Eloqua or something like that would integrate with an electronic medical record, and they don't understand how to weave that all together. And then what does a customer journey actually look like? Where it is prior, it's been the patient presents, they heal the patient, they send them on their way, and then maybe they'll see a billboard 6 months from now. What we're trying to move to is a customer journey that really never ends, where it has certain ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, but that we start developing a real relationship with that customer where they grow to trust us, and to the earlier presenter, they trust our quality, but they also trust the experience, and we can repeat that experience, and we can inform that experience and get deeper, have a deeper relationship with that patient through an ongoing life cycle. And that holistic view is something that, at least from a provider standpoint, organizations like mine, which aren't terribly huge, but they're big enough, I think we're just starting to cross that threshold.
Thank you. So, and to that point, right? So CRM and other platforms that we're building on now sort of promises 360 degree view of customers, of HCPs, of patients. What do you guys see, I mean, as the real world challenges associated with aggregating that data and making it useful? And then the follow-up is going to be, you know, what are some things that we can do about it, you know, in the next year or two, right, to start to reduce those challenges and make the data more useful?
I don't want to go first.
But yeah,
Go
sure.
for it.
No, you know, I'll just speak to, I think, some of the challenges that we face internally at AZ, and a lot of it has to do with inconsistent capture of data. I think we all want to get to exactly what you were speaking about, but inconsistent capture, also having systems that are at our disposal, but there's a lack of awareness from the marketers that those systems actually exist. So, you know, the folks that are actually going out and purchasing the different technology that could store customer records aren't actually speaking to marketers to understand how do we kind of connect that gap. So I think inconsistent capture of data, and then also lack of awareness internally that those systems actually exist and can aid marketers in developing their campaigns, I think is one of the hurdles and challenges that we face.
I was going to actually take it a step back before we get into CRM, right? And we talk about, like, you know, when we're going into, hey, who is our patient segmentation? You know, what are their attitudes? When we go into our media mix modeling phase to understand how we're going to target them. One of the biggest things that I find the biggest issue is we come up with these great attitudinal patient segments, right? The hero, the good citizen, and it's all this information about who this person is and what they think, but none of it is actionable from a media targeting perspective. And I can't go and take, okay, let me drop this into one of my tools and automatically get those individuals' profiles online, right? It doesn't work like that, and especially in the healthcare space where we have to be, you know, careful with any kind of HIPAA compliance. So I think that's key here. So one of the things that we've started to do is you know, if we at CMI do patient segmentation and HCP segmentation, but if we happen to not be doing that for a client, getting involved earlier on in the process with whoever is, if it's an internal team, a different agency, and making sure that media is a big part of that. Because at the end of the day, it's great to know these groups of people and who they are and what they think, but if we can't do anything to them, we can't target them, we can't reach them, we can't talk to them with a specific message, is it really useful? So that's one of the biggest, I think, especially in the pharmaceutical space, where there's a large gap right now.
You know, and that's an interesting point. So, and we run into that all the time where I work. And one of the things that we've done is we're now starting to do latent semantic analysis on the verbatim search queries, and then trying to align the lexical variants, the way people talk about things, with those attitudinal profiles, and then build content based on the specific semantic structures that they use, the specific language they use, and then field that content. It means we have to build a lot more content.
Absolutely.
And it's a little bit thinner. And what's interesting about that is that we may build, you know, historically we would build like one FAQ page, right? We would pick the prototypical way to ask that question, and then we'd run that one through, and we'd hope that would resonate with everybody. Now we'll build, you know, 5 or 10 versions of that same FAQ page, each one with the question phrased how that particular demographic asked that question, and then the answer is formed in a way that they would, the language that they would use to answer it. And what happens is with, say, you know, RankBrain and some of the more advanced targeting algorithms from Google, we actually see different content being placed in front of different audiences for the same search. And it converts at a much higher rate. And so that's sort of one of the ways that we're approaching that particular issue. And, you know, we use lots of AI and ML, machine learning, in order to process that much data.
Absolutely, and I think to your point before of like what's going on outside of healthcare and what could we be doing better, 2 data sources. One, you mentioned search. Search queries give you an inordinate amount of data and information, not just, you know, what you're getting from Google's keyword planner, but also what you're getting from internal search on your website and other places as well. So I think there's a lot more data there. The other part, social listening. There is a ridiculous amount of people talking way too openly about, you know, their health on social media, but it really gives you insight into what questions those individuals have that are going unanswered from your brand.com or your FAQ page. That is a gold mine, something that we've really started to use to match up with those patient segments to potentially help us with targeting from a contextual perspective.
From our perspective, our challenges are a little bit different in that a lot of what you referenced earlier, which is what we're dealing with, which is silos, data accuracy, those kinds of things. So what we've done is my counterparts in in patient experience, we'll call it, IT, and myself have endeavored to really identify who owns what. We have some IT that's proprietary in terms of the software technology, and we've assigned owners and we've assigned the metrics that in the short run we want to establish a dashboard. We want to understand who owns what, get on the same page, understand where our investments are for 18, 36 months out, and then how this is going to be in service of our communication objectives as well as our patient experience objectives. Prior to my arrival and the arrival of some others, that wasn't happening. Everybody was operating against their own objectives, within their own silos, taking direction from the same group of senior executives, but there was no coherent strategy. So what we've really tried to do is pull the IT experts together, pull the patient experience experts together, marketing experts, and understand, based on the objectives that we've been given, what are we going to do? What is our consensed plan? What are our metrics that we're going to measure, that we're going to goal ourselves by? And then try and stand up that structure and realign resources to go make some of that happen. But again, from a provider perspective, I don't see a lot of that from my peers. And I think the hospitals and the doctors and the providers that I talk to, a lot of that structure is what's lacking, and that coordination is what's lacking. And I see that as probably our nearest and dearest next step.
So one of the things that anybody who engages with me knows now what my first question is whenever I try and develop a segmentation or predictive model or any types of insights, is I start by asking, what is the objective of the insight you want me to give you? How are you going to act on it? Because there are different approaches, even segmentation. There's attitudinal-based segmentation, primary research. You can understand the why people behave certain ways, the different segments, but you can't assign a person to a segment on your database. But it has a lot of value from the insights you get. You have behavioral segmentation that helps you through the activities, the transactions, the patterns, the behavior. You can put people in different segments depending on their response to campaigns, etc. But again, sometimes you don't understand the why. You also have syndicated segmentation systems out there, like the Prism, Personix, Mosaic. Different providers provide you different ones, and those are great because they give you an indication for a linkage to other data sources that tell you the why and external behavior to your own customer base. So it gives you information about the market, about the prospect, about the growth of those segments. And the question is, how do you integrate all of those together? And there are ways of doing that. And a lot of times the syndicated segmentation is the link between your attitudinal and your behavioral. Now, one of the other things I like to do is I like to have everybody at an enterprise level see themselves and see the value of the segmentation. In my opinion, segmentation is a very strategic initiative. So, for example, in healthcare, payer industry, insurance business, finance looks at things in terms of reserves, in terms of the medical loss ratio. That's how they look at the risk. How much do I have to put on reserve to be able to pay the claims for all these new members are coming on board. So when you're building a segmentation, that should be a metric that you provide them on the back end at a segment level so that they can understand what do they need to plan for. On the call center customer service side, they have you integrate that information because it helps you know, does this segment tend to ask questions related to benefits, related to, do they need more understanding about the plan they have? Is it more grievances? And the grievances is a big thing in healthcare you want to try and reduce. So it's important to have the segmentation, have everybody in your enterprise understand how they're going to leverage that, because that's how you can bring everybody together. Now that causes challenges because the data that a customer call center uses is its own system, own technology. They use it to operate their call center. Sometimes things are comments, not data, like structured data. But there are now, the good thing is there's technology that can help translate that. So that's a good thing. Another challenge is if you think about claims or data warehouses, why they were built in the healthcare system, it's for education. I wrote it down because I keep education of claims. So basically, it's a 3-year type of systems that they look at to make sure that the claims were paid right, that there were no problems with it. So history is not always maintained. There are different systems, like one maybe has 3 years, another one has 10 years back, and that's all you get. There isn't that loyalty concept yet that's used regularly in a healthcare insurance industry, not like in banking or retail or so on. So sometimes they don't have a data element, which I was surprised of, like the first time you had that relationship with that member. They may have gone somewhere else and came back. You've got all that data about them when they were with you. That's not always connected. So it's a lot of, those are the types of challenges. It's really thinking at a higher level, at a member journey and all the touch points, and how can I sew that together, and how can I maybe sometimes have to piece it one piece at a time until I can build that data hub, or something that takes, by the way, 3 to 5 years of investment. And in marketing, you need to have to generate return on your investment very quickly. So those are some of the challenges. And that's why I think segmentation needs to be at an enterprise level, just to get everybody on the same page.
Right. And speaking to that, so pulling a thread from our prior panel, the question had become, how do you do that? Do you build the internal capability, or do you go out and outsource it and bring it in? We're in the process of bringing in a digital-first agency who can help us stand up that infrastructure, get our data nice and clean, and so we start with a strong baseline and a strong software application on top of it, so we can manage it going forward, and then help us understand, to your point, where our core segments are, where our core competencies are in terms of clinical pathways, whether it be cardiology or oncology. Where do we have competitive advantage that we can then leverage against that newly developed database? But we have a strong team, but we don't have the digital expertise to go and do that on our own. So we've acquired it, and one of our mandates in the RP was help us get to that place where we can manage the data on our own. Help us pull us up the learning curve quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in a lot of RFPs that have come our way, right? It's like, how do you get us started today and then train us and build systems for us that we can assume that, management of those things. We're talking about institutional silos and managing institutional silos. Are there any practical strategies that you guys have identified for breaking down some of those silos and identifying and sort of finding that data that lives in the organization somewhere and then actually getting access to it? Because certainly it's been a challenge for us over the years. When you start asking around, nobody knows where it is. Nobody knows who really owns it. Nobody's even sure if you're allowed to have access to it. So do you guys have any input on that?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the areas where it benefits to be working with an agency, and I'm not trying to plug agencies, but often we are in a position where we see multiple approaches to data management and the use of data. So we have the ability to go into a client and say, this is how it should be done, and this is what we need. Help us find that data within your organization. So if it is a situation where you're at the client, it is siloed, you don't know who has it, there's often people that, hopefully you're not in that situation, but there are partners out there that can help guide the conversation, help you understand what good looks like, and help you find exactly what is needed and where it lives. And oftentimes we'll also come with that data, that insight that says when you do this, it equals this, and show actual results. And being able to do that and showing this can bring ROI is a big factor in getting the higher ups to buy in, right? They're not just going to give you the data if it's not going to lead to results.
And frankly, that's kind of why I am where I am. I was hired from outside of the healthcare industry. Our executive management knew that they didn't know what they didn't know. So they wanted somebody who had had some experience in setting up that customer journey and understanding it, both from a customer experience and marketing perspective as well as a data perspective. So, when I walked through the door, I created a deck which I shared with some of my peers and said, this is what good could look like from a customer experience perspective for our patients. And then this is how you amortize your initial investment in marketing and you cascade it through that relationship with that customer over time. And thankfully, our senior leaders, in IT and customer experience and other places, they get it, and they were actually anxious for somebody to come in and help them stitch all those disparate pieces together. And so I've been fortunate in that I've walked into kind of that scenario, and we have executive management who are quite innovative in how they approach things, and they've looked for those skill sets and invested in and brought them in. But yeah, I mean, it's really creating that picture of the future and laying out the tactical points to fill in those gaps. It's paint by numbers.
So I actually do think you were trying to plug CMI, but we've actually done quite a bit of work with Justin's team and had to rely on an agency, especially from a non-personal promotion standpoint with healthcare professionals, and using our call plan to, take it a step further in terms of how we segment those physicians, understanding what their prescribing behavior is like, but also understanding how do they like to receive communication, whether it's through print journals, whether it's through digital, and tying that media consumption behavior to their prescribing habits. And that kind of lays the groundwork for how we structure our media plans, how we allocate our budgets, what actual content do we need to produce, and what channels we need to participate in. So, when there is a lack of sort of an internal team to help with things like this, we really rely on our agencies. I'd also like to, pay attention to the fact that we rely a lot on advanced analytics partners like Crossix and IQVIA to also help to fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, we don't have the pleasure of working with CMI on every brand that I happen to work on. So in cases like that, we'll hand our lists over to another third party to help us with that segmentation. Obviously, de-identified and blinded, but they're able to usually turn that back to us to help us make informed decisions about our media plans and how we go to market.
Excellent. Yeah. So, can you guys speak to some of the privacy concerns and regulatory concerns that are emerging, or that you're seeing as we bring this data together and leverage it in our marketing campaigns?
So when I was at the healthcare insurance company, I became very good friends with the chief security officer because I seemed to be triggering all kinds of problems for him and getting different emails saying I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't get this external data and so on. But it's just, one is really understanding the space and helping the, there are reasons why these HIPAA laws are in place and these privacy laws are in place. There are, for me and the work I do, I don't need the name of the patient. I just need to understand their behavior and their activities and so on. And there are companies, third-party providers, external data providers who have put systems in place and who are HIPAA compliant that can provide you, again, that external information that you need, and they don't return the PII. And so there are ways to get the type of information that you have, but again, you have to be cognizant of how you're using the data, when can you use it, and having that, again, close relationship with the security officers just to know what's possible, what's not. Like an example is a technique now is web scraping, so trying to understand competitive engagement on the internet, and we had to explain how we're using it and, trying to stay away from being legally viable for some things. So, yeah.
Can you just explain what you mean by web scraping?
So it's basically, it's an analytic tool and technology that helps you track certain words on the internet that you write, an algorithm that you write to understand and download some words and analyze it on the back end. So it's like scraping the web for information. And there are, right now, there's, I mean, again, there are some regulations about that too, but it's a new technology.
So I was going to say, I think an easy way to explain web scraping, if you guys are all familiar with Google, essentially Google has these things called web crawlers. They go out and crawl every single page in the world, and they index, and they look for certain things, and they say this is what this page is about. And then when you go and you search for, you know, Nike tennis shoes, it brings you back results based on what it found from those web scrapers. And they can be used in a lot of different ways. Competitive tools we all use on a daily basis for our media efforts all use different variants of web scraping tools. And it sounds like you're doing some pretty cool stuff with those as well.
Yeah, and it actually triggered at the insurance company I worked for, it triggered our security team to be making sure that we're protecting our own website. So the fact that we were able to do that triggered them to look at their privacy statement and take care of protection too. So, you know, sometimes good things happen from trying different things. So.
I think recently what we've seen with Facebook and GDPR, I think we all probably went through some trying times earlier this year, one Facebook scandal after the next, but it really forced us to take a hard look at what our cookie policies were, what our privacy notices were on our websites, and making sure that we were being very transparent about data and information that we were collecting from customers visiting our website. So I'd say that, you know, what we did is consulted with our chief privacy officer to ensure that we had all the right language and that we were truly covered based on all of the you know, data collecting and retargeting efforts that we were doing. I also think, you know, consulting with your regulatory and legal partners early and often, I know for some folks, you know, that can be challenging, but I do think that having them have a seat at the table and understanding what it is that you're seeking to do can be beneficial in the long run. You know, in case that you do run into hurdles, I think having them bought into what you're trying to do is definitely helpful.
From the provider perspective, for us, it's less about getting specific pieces of data, but it's more about understanding the condition and not speaking specifically to the condition, but providing additional value to an individual, let's say, who's facing a cardiac issue. Let's say they've come to us in the past for content. We want to continue their relationship, continue providing them value, but we don't want to speak to any specific issue that they may have or somehow leverage their EMR data into our search activity. We want to keep a firewall between those two elements. We also want to avoid, you know, what's commonly referred to as the creepiness factor. So we want to make sure that we're providing value into the specific area that's relevant for them, but we don't want to speak specifically to, you know, their issue that they presented with, but still remain relevant.
Panel, I'm sorry, we have to leave some time for questions. We have some questions from the audience, starting with Andrew.
Thank you so much. It's great. Andrew Eklund, I'm with Cicerone. You'll hear from me later, so I'll leave it at that. I'm curious what you are doing with your first-party data. How many of you are standing up your own DMP for media purposes, or if you're using anything like Domo, which can pull in data from all over the place and hopefully synthesize it, or is it a mess like most people?
I can say from the agency side, we have our own DMP set up on the HCP side and are building that out for the DTC side as well, building out an entire database of over 260 million consumer profiles. We found that I think one of the issues we have is there's a lot of data out there on individuals, but it doesn't necessarily tie to healthcare. And that's one of the biggest missing gaps in data available for us from a targeting perspective, where we've actually had to go out and say, we need to build this ourselves. So we're doing that actually right now, and hopefully going to be launching something pretty cool down the pipeline.
From the provider perspective, no. That's phase 2 or phase 3. So the first perspective is I outlined before is to stand up a robust data set of our own consumers, you know, and people like them, and then be able to pull in Tableau or Domo or something like that and be able to help us analyze and get more efficient going forward. But no, right now for us it's creating the structure, creating the robust data gathering, and cleansing activities that we need to be able to go forward and do that more succinctly.
I'd
We-
say.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that from a farmer perspective, I would say that we're very much in a similar place. We do have a DMP internally. It's not being used. And so right now we're really focused on consistent capture of data and data cleansing, and then also promoting awareness within the organization that a DMP does exist, and then figuring how we can actually tap into it and use it for our media targeting purposes.
We have another one over here.
Rhonda Meyer from True Media. I'm wondering if anybody has firsthand experience working with third-party data after GDPR across overseas, and in Europe or any of those.
U.S.-based only. here.
U.S. only.
Nope.
Same here.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is Yi Hui. I'm from PulsePoint. We're a programmatic health technology platform. Question, I guess, for all of you about building a DMP and what you guys use it for. How do you, I guess, thread the fine line between understanding the 260 million consumer profiles that you build on, and what do you use it for? Are we allowed to use that for targeting in any kind of media activation? And if so, what are the do's and don'ts?
That is a extremely loaded question that we probably could do our own panel on. Look, obviously, separation of church and state is, I think, a big part of it. So the people that are executing any type of the media, so our media strategists, our media planners, any of that, they never know who they are targeting. They get an ID, right? And that may never even touch their email. Everything is done through a third party between company, third party, and then people that are actually, taking a patient segment and uploading it into the back of a DSP and targeting, or into the back end of Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So there's a lot of fine lines and firewalls in place, so there are no HIPAA compliant issues. I know we're kind of at the end. I'd love to talk to you more about it because there's a ton of specific things in place to prevent any issues from and do's and don'ts.
We have time for one last question.
Is this on? Okay. Yep. Hi, Zara Castro with Experian. This question is actually for Justin. So you talked about, building all these profiles and segments, and there's that drop-off when it comes to activation. Could you elaborate, why that's so? Is that an internal issue? Is that because the process is so manual with your vendors?
That's a really good question. So I would say this actually comes from experience from a client we took over a couple years ago. There was some great, big, beautiful insights into, hey, this person was activated by our TV ad, and they went and saw a doctor, and they didn't get our drug. We want to target them. You can't target somebody that, they called it a specific name, I forget what it was, but we can't target that individual because there's nothing internally tracking that John Smith didn't get prescribed that drug. And that was a big part of where these individuals, or where this company wanted to invest money, was in this subset, so they could get these people to go back in the doctor and say, no, I really want this. So that was kind of an aha moment a couple years ago of saying, we need to start, our patient segmentation needs to take media consumption behavior into account. And instead of just these attitudinal segments. So it's Experian. You guys, we can talk later, but do it. This is probably a little bit before when it actually comes up into breaking out and what we're breaking those individual segments out into and what's the kind of attitudinal reasons behind the breakout.
Hans and panel, thank you very much for drilling deep on this one. I never know where data panels are going to go, but you guys made it work. Thank you so much. One of the big stories in digital branding over the last several years has been the direct-to-consumer brands. We've had them all along, of course. Digital has always built brands, but now we're seeing brands being built in categories that maybe many of us who were even enthusiastic about digital just a few years ago never would have imagined. And now they're starting to move into the health segment. And we're starting to see everything from small over-the-counter devices to prescriptions and prescription devices actually building brands online. The D2C D2C category is fascinating because these are the true digital natives. They were built from the ground up with data in mind, data at their core, with integration, without the silos that traditionally bedevil most legacy brands. So it's always fascinating to get their perspective on at least what the North Star is for everybody else to be aiming towards. So we wanted to assemble at least a sampling of D2C brands and to talk about what the legacy brands and media can learn from these guys and their experiences and what they're seeing in the market and how they've changed the ways in which they relate to and understand and target consumers. To take the lead on this panel, we have Beatriz Mallory, who's the SVP and Managing Director at Census Health. She has served a number of roles in and outside of healthcare over the years, VP of Marketing for Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital in Los Angeles, as well as working with a number of brands outside of healthcare and financial services, lottery, casinos, CPGs, and beauty products. Please welcome Beatriz and our group of D2Cs.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I assume you all can hear us well enough. Good morning. I know, I'm always annoyed when speakers do that, but you know, it's been an intensive morning so far. I know that I've been learning quite a bit, and I hope all of you have as well. I also appreciate the fact that those of you who are streaming live are streaming this event, as opposed to other events that might be streamed today. But no more about that. I am very fortunate to be seated here with some very, very smart gentlemen who've done some really amazing things in a space that I wouldn't necessarily describe as new. I believe that these are not necessarily organizations that are creating new categories within healthcare. I really do believe that we're looking at new entrants at existing points of care in the existing system who are coming at it from a different way. And so I hope that you'll enjoy hearing from us. We're also going to be doing this a little less formally, and so some of our panelists are going to speak and ask questions of each other as well. So I hope you'll be comfortable with that, and of course we'll have time at the end. And so to my immediate left is Mario Anglade, and he is one of the founders, or one of the founders, okay, of OI Health, although I happen to know he did more than most others involved with that. And OI Health is a phenomenal platform for what has been traditionally an underserved community of Latinos and Hispanic consumers in the U.S. I also am very fortunate to have here Robert Birch from Blink Health, which is another interesting organization in the space. I think they've also brought a level of innovation that is very much appreciated by the consumers that we'll hear about. And finally, but not least, is Samir Boucher, who is here representing the organization, spacing out here, I'm sorry, FSA.com plus HSA.com.
Yeah, FSA-store.com.
I'm sorry, FSA-store.com and HSA-store.com. Okay, so you can go back to streaming the other thing now. Anyway, they are a phenomenal organization. Those of you who work for employers that provide the options of FSAs and HSAs will find that this kind of option to be able to understand what you are actually able to obtain under your plan is very beneficial. But I'm going to ask each of them to more fully describe what their organizations do, and so that's where we'll start. Mari?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. At OI Health, what we're doing is we have a very simple mission that is targeted to providing everybody, everywhere, accessible and affordable primary health. And we focus on primary health because we understand that that area is a challenge for the system as it stands today. So our system is built on two main pillars. One is access and one is patient engagement. Access equals cost. We have medication sales programs. We have a program that allows you to buy medication for anybody else in the US and share that via a voucher system. We have the same capability starting in October going to anybody in Mexico. So if you're a Mexican-American consumer and your family lives in Mexico, you're going to be able to buy on our site. We transmit that order to our partner in Mexico, and in 24 hours it's delivered there. So access is one area. We're expanding into nutrition, peripherals, other areas that are adjacent to the medication space. In the patient engagement platform, we're working on two main things. One is telemedicine, bilingual care, 24/7, everywhere that it's allowed by law in the US, internationally into the markets that I mentioned. And lastly, we're working on patient engagement platforms for chronic conditions. So two main areas. One is as a provider support. So if a partner needs us to manage their patients for them, we can do that very effectively and about 90% cost reduction. And number two is if you don't have insurance, then we can provide you a kit delivered directly to your home with everything that you would need for diabetes at a very low price point. Thank you.
Robert?
Very good. So at Blink Health, we're the app for getting the lowest prices on prescription meds. We're an e-commerce service, so very simply, patients buy online, they pick up at any one of our 33,000 participating pharmacies nationwide. We operate completely independent from the incumbent system, so we have our own network agreements with pharmacies, we have our own technology platform for managing that, we're completely independent of the PBM system, and bypassing those middlemen as an e-commerce service helps us, bring lower prices. And, our customers tend to be anyone who has high out-of-pocket costs on their prescription coverage, no prescription coverage, and in many cases, very good prescription coverage, but a certain medication is, has a high copay on their formularies. We see all of those folks.
Sammy?
Yep. Good morning. So we operate two web properties, FSAstore.com and HSAstore.com, and our goal is we have a couple goals. So first is to educate consumers about FSAs and HSAs. So most of us have them, but a lot of people don't really know what they do, how to use them, or even how much money to put into your FSA or HSA. So our sites help clarify that and put messaging out there that helps consumers make decisions to simplify the healthcare journey. So a couple examples on FSA Store and HSAstore.com. You can go on there, you can learn about the FSAs and HSAs, and then we also give you a landing destination in terms of like products to be able to spend your dollars on. So suntan lotions, for example. A lot of people don't know that suntan lotion's eligible, right? I've seen a head shake there. No, I did not know that, right? You can use your FSA card and buy suntan lotion for the year. Tylenol, all sorts of other products. So visit the site, plugging themselves right now. But
And that's fine. That's fine. That's one of the reasons you're here, right?
Yep.
Ultimately. Actually, I have a question for you.
Yep.
It was an initial conversation you and I had that led to the introduction I gave, where I really feel personally that these organizations that are represented here are not, quote, disruptors, unquote, that we really are looking at entrants who are just bringing a different perspective and a different approach to existing care delivery points. Can you elaborate a little bit on how FSAstore.com
Yeah, for sure.
fits
So
that?
I think when we had our initial conversation, part of it was about the term disruption. And to me, I hear that word, and I don't want anyone disrupting my healthcare. Like I want people collaborating and finding better ways of delivering healthcare. I don't necessarily want things totally disrupted. I don't see huge disruption coming in healthcare. I see technology and a lot of advancements in the way healthcare is delivered to complement existing models. I don't see this huge disruptive thing that's going to go on and just completely change healthcare altogether. I don't know what you guys would think about that.
So you don't think there's going to be an Uber?
I don't think, I honestly, I personally, and it's probably a contrarian point of view, I don't see an Uber of healthcare. I see precision medicine helping out and doctors using genetics to deliver better treatments to people, looking for ways to drive better outcomes. And then from our company's perspective, I mean, we're a consumer-facing company, right? So we're trying to simplify messaging out there. We're trying to get better education out there around healthcare. around healthcare planning. You know, I think doing things like that to maybe drive more preventative treatments and better wellness overall is probably more where the ball is moving, like making healthcare more consumer friendly or consumer centric, as opposed to the old models where it was, you know, you had an insurance card and, you know, if you were sick, you went to the doctor, right? Well, now I think there's all sorts of different options. Do you wait it out? Do you visit FSAstore.com and maybe, you know, you have an ear infection, maybe get like an ear wash, right, instead, and treat it with the ear wash before you go to the doctor. I think that's really where the ball's moving, where the industry's moving, as opposed to seeing this huge like Uber of healthcare.
Yeah,
Robert, your perspective.
yeah, you know, I would just add, you know, I think that's a very refreshing perspective, particularly just because there's just so much hype around tech companies and so forth. And you know, when you say Uber, you know, a lot of people just go right to so many things that invokes. I would offer a couple of things that I think are perhaps relevant for you know, looking at Uber. You know, first, you know, Uber has faced incumbent challenges everywhere they've gone. The second thing is they've brought market forces to an industry and, you know, enormously grown a category. And I think those are lessons for anyone who's looking at, you know, healthcare and technology is going to face, and certainly one that we face. And I think, you know, disruption has become a trite word, no question. But I think, you know, we feel extremely strongly that in our case, you know, disruption in the classic definition, Clayton Christensen, we are unambiguously disrupting. And, you know, right now, you know, we see the market that we're in, prescription drugs, is, you know, for all intents and purposes, is 20 years behind every other consumer category. You know, if you read Mary Meeker's report, you'll see that 13% of retail is e-commerce. In reality, it's much closer to 20% because she doesn't include travel, which is not classified as a retail category, and it's by far the largest e-commerce category by far. So, you know, for most consumer purchases, 1 in 5 is e-commerce. It's 0 in prescription drugs. And, you know, prescription drugs is actually the one part of the healthcare economy that is a consumer transaction. In fact, it's 90% of the transactions because, you know, you have 4+ billion transactions. And, you know, when you look at what e-commerce has done in every other consumer category, it has disrupted major players. And, you know, this is a category that is remarkably opaque. You know, in all the other consumer categories where you do have, let's call it 20% e-commerce penetration, you have choice, you have agency, consumer agency, you have transparency, and you've been able to bring prices down. And in all of those industries, you know, whether you go through travel, whether you go through brokerage, whether you go through music, all of these industries where the internet economy has come in, powerful middlemen that were profit-seeking have essentially disappeared. And I actually worked in the online travel industry for a very long time, and when I came into this industry, I'd never heard of a PBM. Once I understood what it was, it sounded an awful lot like the GDSs. And when I was part of the team that started Orbitz in 1999, and at the time, there was a GDS, let's pretend it was a PBM. It made more profit than all of the other airlines combined. And Orbitz was actually started by the airlines to disrupt the middlemen. You know, that company today still exists, but it's tiny and insignificant. And, you know, right now we see powerful middlemen that are profit-seeking in the industry. You know, if you look on the generic supply chain, generic manufacturers have never made less profits. The PBMs are making enormous profits, and consumers have paid the highest prices. And so, you know, we absolutely believe that we're disrupting the middlemen in what we're doing, and in a classic sense. But I do appreciate your point for sure.
At Oi Health, we agree with some of what's been said, but what our approach is, we believe incremental disruption is what's going to happen in healthcare. So pricing transparency is an example that was mentioned previously. That's something that when you start peeling the layers back and you understand that once you aggregate consumers, you have bargaining power, negotiation power, all of a sudden the dynamics shift dramatically. So what we think at Oi Health is that we want to be sure we're embedded into the incumbents and we help those incumbents navigate a patient relationship, right? Why does a consumer who does not have insurance, why does that consumer not have healthcare? We think that that's wrong. Could you get price points down to where a consumer can have a $25 telemedicine consult? Yes, you can. Could you get consumer pricing of medications down to $40 for 60-day supplies? Yes, you can. You can even go lower than that. So our approach is always working within the system to understand, listen, we're here to help. We're here to bring you consumers. Those consumers have a need. You have a solution. But let's take it from a different angle. Let's go into a cash-based transaction that doesn't fall within all the burdens of those transactions that are ultimately navigated and managed by a third party. So if we have a direct relationship with a patient where we can get them their medications, access to care, their peripherals, their devices, and use technology as an enabler, then I think that's disruptive in and of itself. Having a one-to-one relationship with a patient for a particular physician is impossible. Technology now allows you to do that. So that's our opinion.
Thank you, thank you. Appreciate that interesting nuance in all of that. Now, there's also probably some nuance in terms of your opinions in this regard. Are your target consumers a new generation of consumers? Or are they healthcare consumers who are not necessarily of one specific or a more digitally motivated or digital native population? Do you believe that your targets are a new generation of consumers?
Well, I'll take a first shot at that. I think from a behavioral standpoint, yes. And, there are obviously a number of trends that are pushing consumerization of healthcare. First of all, I think I read, nearly a quarter of, people who are on employee-based insurance plans are in high deductible plans now, and the out-of-pocket costs continue to rise. And once they get to a certain point, that's going to drive consumers to pay an awful lot more attention to what they're paying, and they're going to look for transparency. Then you have innovation all over. We're three of just countless numbers of companies that are trying to bring transparency and market forces. And as people move online, and when you have players like Apple trying to get people to pay attention to their healthcare on their phone, and innovation after innovation, it's kind of like water. When the internet economy makes its way in, it's going to find its way. And so, I think, yes, it's a new consumer from a behavioral standpoint, but I think it's going to cross demographic and socioeconomic backgrounds, completely. So in that sense, no.
I see you shaking your head, Mario.
No, I agree. I agree from the perspective of looking at a consumer and understanding what our target audience is. We reach we are focused on serving underserved medical populations across the U.S. That's not a new concept. Everybody who's been in healthcare knows underserveds have always been underserved. So what we're trying to do is we say, let's do something about it. Let's do it in a way where we can bring those consumers, start inflecting that cost curve where it matters. We understand hospital systems work really well once you're sick, once you're inside, but what happens when you're a diabetic, a hypertensive, you have any other chronic condition and you're not supported in the community environment? So from our perspective, what we're saying is we're bringing in a new type of consumer that historically didn't have access to the system. And we're doing it because that consumer doesn't have to go through the traditional model. If you want to come and you want to buy medications at low cost from us, we'll sell them to you. If you want to have telemedicine on our platform directly with a provider that is board certified bilingual, we'll allow you to. So the idea of us creating a system that is parallel and supportive of the traditional model is where we think that that new consumer from our angle is coming in.
Samir, do you have a
Yeah, so I would say, I think it's probably a mix of both. So from a new consumer perspective, I think when you think of healthcare, you traditionally, I've spent 16 years in healthcare distribution, working directly with acute and post-acute. And when I think healthcare, I think patients, right? So I say, well, this patient, everybody in the office is like, don't use the word patient, it's consumer, it's customer. So it's interesting. And
you hear that a lot.
And you hear it a lot, but for me, it's at the end of the day, you're seeing a person there, right? And that, like you said, the person's habits, people's habits are changing, right? The traditional ways of delivering healthcare is changing. And so, you know, people are out shopping for options, right? They're trying to find, you know, does it make sense for me to use my health insurance to get my MRI? Or should I go online and possibly look for a different option to get my MRI that could be cheaper to me because I'm not going to hit my deductible anyhow? And you know, we can get into a lot of stuff about deductibles and the end of the year. Are you going to hit your deductible? Is it worth even applying it to your deductible? Should you just use your FSA dollars and just literally shop it out? So, you know, I think, yeah, customers are changing, and that the habits of these customers are changing.
So it's
overall.
behavioral.
Yeah,
That's
behavioral,
what I'm hearing
yeah,
is the summary.
Yeah, it's more
Okay,
behavior, yeah.
okay. Well, since it's so behaviorally driven, that can get us into the topic of segmentation. And essentially, I don't know, I guess one of the ones I heard was we talk about high out-of-pocket, people with high out-of-pockets, right? People who may not be able to hit their copay, right? And then we have people who are non-insured or underinsured, let's put it that way. So each one of you targets each of those in different ways. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you affect segmentation for your properties?
Yeah, I could start. So our acquisition, our customer acquisition model is very different, and it's unique in comparison to a lot of other e-commerce companies out there. So what we do different is we actually partner directly with TPAs, so third-party administrators, people who administrate the benefit to employees, right? And then we also directly work with employers. So we're partnering with these companies to let them know, hey, you know, health insurance obviously has changed. We, you know, up here saying it over and over again. High deductibles, they're gonna continue to get higher and higher every year. Let us help your employees with understanding how to plan for the FSA and HSA space. And in addition to that, let us help them understand where they can spend those dollars and what they can spend those dollars on.
And do most of the employers you work with have a younger workforce that's healthier and less chronic disease?
So you think of the FSA, HSA space and the healthcare space in general. I mean, you're on a commercial insurance. You're probably going to be, well, now it's like 27, right? Because a lot of kids are staying on their parents' insurance. So then after 26, they're getting their own insurance. So it's like 27 to 60-something years old based on when somebody retires and then when somebody gets moved on to Medicare, right? So our from an age demographic, I mean, we're serving a 20-something to high 50-something population, and that's our target, right? And if you just look at the workforce in general, the workforce in terms of like the male to female ratio, the female ratio is growing. So 60% of the customers we serve are female, right? They're the caretakers. They're the person that helps everybody at home get, you know, your Tylenol. You can get your, you know, your ear wash, and you need your suntan lotion before you go to school today, right? So I mean, that's how we look at it, and that's kind of how we're approaching it.
The chief healthcare officer.
Yeah.
So. Mario, same question, because to some degree you are, I don't want to say, I'm sure anyone can come and use your platform,
Sure.
but you're very much directed toward Latinos and others who may not necessarily be comfortable with working with physicians who aren't necessarily cognizant of their language or understanding of their culture.
Absolutely.
But is the segmentation a little more refined than that?
It is. It is from the perspective of what we start with is with the idea and the understanding that we build everything English and Spanish from day one, and we build everything with a third grade education level, because we want to make our products available to everybody. If you come in, you like our products, we know you're going to stay. The other thing that we know is that there are subsets of the population that historically have had less access to healthcare in the traditional model. So our focus of Hispanics is by design because of the need, but more importantly, it's because of the opportunity. When you look at the demographics of the U.S. and you look at where the U.S. is going in the next 25 years, A lot of the growth for the US comes from the Hispanic consumer. The other thing that we also understand is that we're not going to be able to achieve this on our own, so we do partnerships. And we are agnostic to our partner as long as that partner has a shared mission with us. So our partners today can include a trade union, a hospital system, a retailer, that's a pharmacy, a supermarket, or it could be people in the community who say, listen, I have a church and I really love what you guys are doing, and we want to expose our members towards it. It's really critical when we engage with our consumers, you have that aha moment, and the consumer's like, wow, I didn't know you could actually do this. And that was, for the team, really eye-opening, but the really, really eye-opening environment that we went is when we start partnering with institutions, and you see healthcare professionals who have spent their career doing engagement with consumers, and they understand what you're trying to do. Some of them are like, this sounds too good to be true. Is this possible? And the answer is yes. So we focus on the partnerships to drive that healthcare professional engagement. Once they understand what we're doing, they become our advocates, and we also go after the consumer in a bilingual fashion in the US, but specifically focus on the Hispanics for the reasons that I mentioned.
Thank you. Robert, I have a specific slant for you, though.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about the Blink Health Nation.
Sure. Let me start with the segmentation question. It's funny we talk about this. As a mission-driven company, we have a corporate philosophy of humans first. We strive to lower prescription drug prices and make them affordable for everyone, which in a way is philosophically contradictory to segmentation. But we approach marketing in general in the same fashion we approach building product, which is fast iteration, extensive use of A/B experiments, and a lot of investment in measurement. And so, segmentation flows out of that as opposed to segmentation up front, though we do plenty of that. In terms of your question about, Blink Health Nation, we have the fortune of our patients, and we do use the term patients, thank you for making that distinction. Our patients and also providers, they spread the word very actively for us, and we literally have thousands of people send us videos that tell their story on selfie cameras about what having lower prescription prices has done for their families and their lives. And we've just put those together to allow people to share that. But it gives us great tailwinds from a customer acquisition standpoint, because the social diffusion, so many American families are struggling, and we have providers who tell us that, which is amazing to hear, that people literally choose between meds and food. And so when they find something like Blink that can save them so much money, they're very apt to share that. So that's Blink Health Nation is really just celebrating that and helping people share their stories and spread the word.
It's wonderful for generating testimonials. It really is.
Thanks.
And do any of you want to ask each other questions? And if the answer is no, that's okay. We'll open it up to everybody else.
We have a lot more people out here.
Yeah,
We do. Is it premature to open to the audience? We have limited time, and we'd really love to hear from you. Questions?
Hang on.
This one way in the back. Thank you.
Hi. Zara Castor with Experian once more. This question is for Robert. So I love what you guys are doing at Blink Health. I think it's amazing. As you grow your business, are there any ambitions to tap into that data and utilize it for measurement? I mean, right now you have, 2 organizations that you can go to for this. So just curious to see if that's something you guys have thought about.
Could you just clarify?
Sure. So for measurement for ad effectiveness.
Measurement for ad effectiveness of what?
Of prescription refills.
I'm sorry.
With you guys, you're seeing all these prescription refills, correct?
Yeah.
So you're getting all that information, right? The scripts that they fill, who they are. So there's organizations out there, right, like an IMS or a CrossFit.
Do we consider monetizing the data of our patients' behavior?
For measurement purposes.
Yeah, you know, right now that's not something we're at all looking at. You know, now I understand your question. So I think the answer is no.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's just curious to see.
Sorry. Yeah. No. Of course.
Okay. Thank you.
There's a question up front.
Oh, go ahead. Hi, Amy Fries with Be The Match, and I just was curious to understand. You haven't really talked much about how you're marketing your in D2C in terms of, digital media. We want to just share a little bit about some of the strategies you have to reach consumers and what's been successful.
You're asking me.
I'm asking anyone.
Oh yeah, sure.
So we engage with the consumer through a variety of vehicles. The community is a starting point because we understand that the community engagement and that interconnectivity of the federally qualified health clinic, the doctor's clinic, the hospital is a good starting point to interact with consumers. After we do that, the direct-to-consumer engagement happens on social media for us. Hispanics tend to be over users of technology, social media, and the like, so we found that channel is a very effective one for us to be able to communicate. Where we're at right now, those are the two primary elements of engagement. Over time, what we're planning to do, and we do use our data for purposes of getting the consumer to understand their condition. So the idea is, once you buy a prescription, we understand what you are buying it for, then we can internally, and we don't monetize it externally, we use the ability to offer you other products and services that we know that you might need based on that. We're a HIPAA-compliant company, so the consumer engagement happens from that perspective internally. And once the consumer is exposed, then we use all the information that he or she allows us to use in order to provide them better service.
So it looks like, or at least what I'm hearing is so much of this is organic.
Yes, it
as
is.
opposed to paid?
It is right now. All our partnerships are unions, trade groups, governments, hospital systems across the nation that have seen the ability to integrate our products and services. And one thing that we do is that we are bi-directional with our partners. We want our partners to be able to generate the information that they need from our customer base, or if it's a shared customer, we have interconnectivities into their electronic medical records and the like. So our relationship is based on an organic growth through the understanding of what the challenges are of our particular target at this point in time.
I'd love to hear about the paid strategies. The paid strategies from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I think she wants to hear about paid strategies. Don't blame you.
Yeah, you know, I think we have a similar finding to Mario. You know, a number of things that are very successful for us have as much to do with, you know, facilitating the social diffusion that's happening. You know, we get quite a bit of inquiry from providers, and you know, we work hard to support their needs because our interests are so aligned with so many of them. Social media is very, very effective for us in a variety of ways, both paid and organic.
Now, I just want to add on to that question. In terms of the relationships with providers, would you say that you are a medical marketer in any way? Do you make any investment in medical marketing?
No, we don't.
Yeah, and so I'd mentioned our strategy is a little bit different from traditional e-commerce, right? So I mean, we're developing partnerships with, again, with the TPAs and the employers on the front end, and we're providing tools and content that can be pushed out to the employees through email, through HR portals. Oops, sorry. Did you guys all miss that? Through emails, HR portals, and then through our learning center. So we're constantly trying to touch these employees as much as we can with the help of our partnerships in the HR departments, right? And then drive them back to the site to be able to get our messaging out, and then also, obviously capitalize on the FSA, HSA spend.
Over here? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Robert Gadar from CMI. Question for another Robert here. You might have answered, which is you don't do medical marketing. Did you mean marketing to HCPs? Because a lot of physicians are concerned about affordability issues. And it could be a way to grow your business, grow your brand, if there was some level of awareness among physicians that they could recommend to their patients that they use your service.
You know, I probably misinterpreted the question. You know, we do market into the provider channel.
Do you actually invest?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Do you spend money in paid media toward physicians?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
Matt Hedberg, Semcasting. First of all, just want to thank all three of you for what you're doing for consumer pricing transparency. It's nice to see in this industry specifically. I guess my question is, looking to the future, the kind of disruptions that you guys are making in the industry as a whole, where do you see some of the potential regulatory changes coming into play? I mean, for you, Robert, specifically, any changes to the safe harbor provision for PBMs, I guess, specifically?
Well, I think, certainly in the branded space, the more that there's transparency there, I think hopefully will help make it easier for all patients to get, the most affordable branded meds that they can provide. And, anything that will improve that. I think, I personally believe the PBMs are extracting unambiguously monopoly rents from that channel, and I think the more that goes away, I think pharmaceutical companies would very much like to have a more direct relationship to consumers. And as the internet economy comes in, the people that add value in a supply chain tend to do very well. The people that don't add value tend not to, and I think. I think that will play out in a way that will benefit anybody who's working toward market forces in the economy, direct consumer access, transparency. And so, yeah, I do think that will be a good tailwind for us and anyone like us who wants to end the opacity and monopoly profits in the middle of the supply chain.
Samir, I would like to elaborate on that question with respect to, I like the look on your face. It's like, no, don't throw that one at me. It's an interesting and, let's say, not so certain future for health insurance in general, both on the public and the private side. What are you as an organization doing to sort of protect yourself against any, let's say, if HSAs become less viable or less desirable, same with FSAs. Just, we know that there's some potential fluctuation in the design of our health insurance market.
Yeah, and I would say there's definitely a lot of noise in terms of what's going to happen with FSAs and HSAs. What I would say is that if you look at healthcare, and I'll keep going back to this, it doesn't change overnight. It takes a very, very long time. So for someone to just, take a pen and say, oh, FSAs and HSAs are gone, that would be really hard for most of America to swallow, right? I mean, you have right now 40 million HSA and FSA accounts that control pretty much, or that could be spent on about 115 million Americans, which pretty much means every family in America has some type of access or is touched by an FSA or an HSA, right? So, I don't know how to prepare for the headwinds of government, and if any of you have any ideas, but take my email and please email me. So I don't know. So really, I mean, again, we're just trying to push messaging out to consumers, help them understand the importance of it, help them understand that, look, you have tax advantages by using these accounts. You want to continue to use them, and hopefully that messaging will continue to drive the adoption of FSA, HSA, and more consumer health care practices in the future.
We have 4 children in my family, so I sure hope FSAs stay. This is the first thing. Thank you.
If I can add something that's important to realize is once you start consumerizing healthcare, peeling it back is going to be really difficult, because once that consumer understands what the capabilities of their self-interaction with a healthcare professional, what the true cost of access, drugs, peripherals, and devices, you're going, I understand your question, but I pivot it to a little bit of thinking about, once you have a direct-to-consumer relationship, if that consumer is engaged with you, if your products and your services are top quality, if that consumer can, at the end of the day, utilize you as a parallel or alternate to what is the incumbent, most likely the headwinds are going to be beneficial for anybody who's trying to disrupt in a way that is systematic and well thought out.
We have another one here, Ann.
Hi, Andrew from Cicerone again. I'm a rabid free marketeer who is attracted to universal health care and a single payer system, like many consumers. Would your business models have a place in Canada or Europe or elsewhere? Are you solving a problem that works uniquely in the American healthcare system? Or do you, say a Bernie Sanders were to come along and win and all these other things happen, how does your business model work if we go through some sort of monumental shift towards either single payer or something like it?
I would just say that I'm not qualified to answer that question, but I would say as a committed free marketeer as well, I don't think there's anything free market about what you've described. Free market to me means there are no third-party payers. The idea of a third-party payer to me, as someone who's fairly new to the healthcare industry, is a little bit crazy once I understood it. I mean, the idea that someone sells me a bunch of prepaid services and then their business model entails making sure that I consume as few of those services as possible, and putting hurdles up in front of those possibles is as far from a free market concept as possible. And I think a universal payer, to me, appears, just as the economist in me, is simply another third-party payer. A free market means there are no frictions between the buyers and the sellers. And I think anyone who's up for a free market system wants people to be able to go and shop for their healthcare services like anything else. I pay for my own oil changes, but I have insurance for, if my car is totaled. Even calling this insurance to me is a little bit odd, because it feels a little bit more like prepaid, overpriced healthcare to me.
If I can add something there, that it's important to understand where your focus area is, right? So OiHealth's mission is to provide primary care everywhere to everybody. So the idea is, can we get to a place where you interact with the physician directly, that physician gets paid a livable wage, and then the consumer has quality health care? Could we add and extend that to medication and to devices and to other ancillary services? The answer in a single payer model is yes, we can survive, because we will be an efficient player within that system that ultimately drives down costs for incumbents. If you specialize, knowing that, one, your consumer is king, he or she. Number two, that you have to drive transparency and value to that consumer. Most likely, I think all three of our companies are able to be positioned into an environment where radical change might take us tweaking of business models, but it doesn't take away the value proposition of going after pricing transparency and cost that shouldn't be in the system at this point in time, at least in my personal opinion.
Beatriz,
my answer is yes.
Panel, thank you very much.
Thank all of you.
So these folks graciously handed us off onto the topic that's going to begin our next presentation. When I started talking to Kimball Wilkins, who's the VP of Brand Research and Creative Studios at Blue Shield of California, one of the places she was starting was in research. And in better understanding how consumers really were approaching and understanding their insurance companies. And the picture was not all that pretty. And the ways in which her program leveraged research and deeper consumer insights to drive not only creative, but also the ways in which the organization reorganized around a more holistic view of the patient, I think is a fascinating story. So to talk to us about this connection between data and creative, between data data and consumer understanding and the infrastructure of an organization and what it really means to take a holistic approach to your consumer. We welcome Kimball Wilkins, who's the VP of Brand Research and Creative Studios at Blue Shield, California. She oversees a lot of the growth strategy, and in just the past few years has overseen 20% membership growth and 30% revenue growth. Please welcome Kimball.
Good afternoon, everybody. I believe I am the last thing between you and lunch, so I will aim to make this worth the wait. Just a few words before diving in today. I'd like to kind of walk you through the journey that Blue Shield as a company has been on. I'll share a few more words about Blue Shield, and actually our agency partner in this work, Butler Shine, has been instrumental. Blue Shield is California headquartered. We are a not-for-profit Blue. California is one of the few states where you actually have competing Blue systems. So you've got Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield of California. It's also a market that is far more HMO than you see on the East Coast. Kaiser is the largest player in the market. They are an integrated vertical system and a formidable competitor. So in that environment, I'm going to go a little deeper for a moment here and just beyond the California market, talk about some of the themes that have been emerging throughout the morning. And I forgot to say how much I've enjoyed just sitting here, participating, listening in all of the discussions. There's lots of great, rich material. In this characterization, and I think the conversation today kind of mirrors that, it's just healthcare as a sector is so rapidly evolving. It's a $1 trillion industry, multiple players. You've got the incumbents, the payers, and the providers. We're definitely in that incumbent category. You've also got upstarts trying to kind of fit into that payer-provider space, but do it differently. I would describe Oscar that way. You've got the Amazons of healthcare coming in, other outside sector players that have capabilities that could be transformative. And you've got huge mergers like the CVS-Aetna merger. So it's a very dynamic environment in which to try to compete, grow, survive are central questions. There's also, as I think Cindy's talk earlier today with the At Living Proof campaign, I loved hearing about that. There's such a powerful human element that runs through all of this. And when you really start there, as our company is aiming to do, that has a different type of transformative power. I won't go into all of these articles, they're just here to sketch. But the Huffington Post, I think, is very illustrative. It talks about one family that clearly benefited from the ACA and had access to care that they would not have had that not gone through. And another family that felt that economically they'd been hurt by it, and in many ways they had. When you go even deeper, and I loved hearing the D2C conversation around what it means to go direct and ways that really just flip the model on its head. But not only are there the stories of the uninsured, but consumers that are struggling and buying in, get that coverage, but then still struggle to actually use it. And as a company, we wrestle with all of that. We knew that in this environment, we had to fundamentally change some of the ways that we do business. We also knew that we would have to go deeper with consumers, really understand them. But the business journey, this is sort of easy to say in hindsight. The business journey itself at times was wrenching and very complex. When reform went through, we were very excited about expanding our individual market, going on the public exchanges and covered California. We are currently a leading player on public exchanges in terms of the membership volume. However, we weren't fully equipped to manage that population, and by that I don't just mean the the risk and understanding the new types of members we had on our books to price accurately or develop the right kinds of utilization models. It was also just the sheer volume. So we were in the midst of a fairly massive technology upgrade, and we had real systems issues when this influx of membership through the exchange came on board. In some ways, some of our operations ground to a halt. It was very difficult internally in terms of morale, and far more importantly, we weren't serving members in the way that we wanted to. So we were going through all of those growing pains, but we remained fundamentally committed to our growth agenda. The mission of the company is very much around achieving tighter partnerships with providers. A lot of our strategic portion of our product offering is through accountable care organizations and sharing risk with the provider partners that we have in those. And we decided, coming out on the other side around 2016, we'd been silent in the market during the period I was describing. We really felt that we had to focus internally, stabilize, meet commitments, serve the new members on our books. But we felt by 2016 that we were starting to come out of that and that we needed to be out and communicating back in the market, and that we needed to understand how, in terms of perception and where we were as a brand, things had evolved. And we learned a tremendous amount as we started to go through that. Oops, I was a little premature there. We did a mix of quantitative, qualitative. We ended up doing work that we described as co-creation labs with consumers and employees. But the kinds of things that we found during this period, not surprisingly, we did have some customer abrasion. There were segments of the market where our favorability had declined, but there were also really promising other spots, new members that were excited to have coverage and were having a good experience, prospects who remained interested. Cindy mentioned earlier Blue Equity, and Blue Equity is very strong even in a market where the Blues aren't in the top leadership position. So we took that, and then we started to go deeper in terms of what consumers were really telling us about how they felt around healthcare, not just around providers, but payers. And it was very striking during this time to compare the kinds of things I would say we heard consumers describing in focus groups, even just 5 years earlier. There had been a shift, and there was, I would say, greater sophistication across the board. Consumers have been learning about healthcare through all of this because they've really had to. There was more gray and less black and white. One of the things I mean by that is, I would say historically, in a focus group, it would be very plain to see that the relationship with a provider is the most trusted, and sort of providers, white hats, payers, black hats. It had gone a lot more gray. There was a lot more kind of questioning about the roles these different constituents played in their health care. And there was also a very sophisticated take on what health meant to them, and very personal stories around that. Sometimes we would ask people to bring in, say, an object into a qualitative session that for them symbolized either their health or healthcare, and get them to talk about it. We had everything from, one woman brought in a sponge because she felt that her healthcare was just soaking up everything. It was powerful and quite negative. There is another consumer who brought in a beautiful but small piece of art that a friend had made for her that captured her personal journey around healthcare. And when we pulled back from all of that and kind of summed it up, some of the things we were hearing were not just these. By the way, a couple of these stats I will just call out. Not all of them from primary research. Some of this was just pulling from studies. Pew, Kaiser Family Foundation, et cetera. But half of consumers are saying that medical treatments are creating as many problems as they solve. Over 80% still saying that affordability is getting in the way of quality care. I think that really speaks to the D2C conversation that we just had. And increasingly higher willingness to switch doctors in order to either save money or have different types of benefits. On top of that, consumers told us that for them, health is mind, body, spirit. It is not all about medical benefits. It is not all about drugs. It is about their mental well-being. It's about stress. It's about their relationships, community, family, in terms of their own kind of overall well-being. It's also I guess I didn't capture it quite there, but the stigmatism around mental health is something that consumers feel acutely, and yet the vast majority of them will say that either they or others in their family have mental health needs that they struggle to meet in one form or another. So there's an appetite for a much more integrated view from providers and from payers of their health and their health care, and a willingness to engage at that level, which is also, I think, tremendous opportunity in general for marketing. Healthcare is all about communication. Marketing is all about communication. And the upper to mid-funnel piece of it is just scratching the surface. It's tremendously important, but there are opportunities to go much deeper in the role that marketing and marketers play in healthcare. With those insights, we did realize that to do this as a company, we really needed a strong foundation and that we needed to get very fundamental about it. So we made a decision. We could have started in a lot of places in terms of investing in marketing. Blue equity in general is strong. Despite the ups and downs I described, ours was still fairly strong. But nevertheless, we felt that the reason to start with brand was that we had to consider employees and executives at every level as very key to what we were trying to do, as well as reintroduce ourselves in the market and establish some kind of emotional connection with consumers, all the more so from having been dark for several years. I think people here know this. I'm not going to pause. The brand positioning that we went with, it's not really about the words on the page, but we did just start with that basic piece. What we were hearing in the focus groups as an opportunity, we tried to translate in our positioning as an emotional benefit of healthcare. In other words, that feeling that whenever you are feeling at your best, you feel more potential in your life. When you feel your best, you feel unstoppable. And there's so much uncertainty and complexity around healthcare that building that confidence and playing that role in terms of our offering was going to be important. We also created a brand line, Never Stop, that appears in a lot of our upper and mid-funnel efforts. More than the positioning itself, where we focused in the initial expression of the brand, and again, thinking internally and externally, was we really wanted an inclusive vision that would mirror the California market. And the California market is changing about as rapidly as healthcare. The Hispanic segment in California just became the dominant segment in California as of this year. It continues to be one of the fastest growing. Like the rest of the country, we have our share of seniors aging in. The pre-SPRY crowd in their 50s and 60s that I heard somebody reference earlier today. And, cultural competency in our market, and I know it's true in some East Coast markets as well, there's a multitude of not just languages, but additional cultural considerations that come into play if you're really trying to deliver care differently. we wanted to capture some of that in our imagery, but we also had a concern. If you think about that low bar that Steve set for creative in healthcare, there is this kind of sea of sameness, either in terms of stock photography or lifestyle, health and wellness types of imagery that we wanted to be able to break through. It's significant as our marketing investment has been for us as a company. It is still a drop in the bucket in terms of what the top spenders in California are spending. United actually leads the market in terms of media spend in California. Humana is close behind. So we focused a lot on photography, portraiture, really trying to capture people as people in that proprietary imagery. We paid attention. We heard in consumer research that sometimes our advertising felt a little lonely was one of the words consumers used, and we realized that the shots where people had a more sort of heroic type of stance, I would describe the woman on her right as where there's this, like a little bit of heroizing in the photographic approach with talent that was photographed individually. We needed to bring in more family, more couples. We started doing that as we evolved our portfolio. And I am going to just play, I will get to a kind of 2-minute or so reel in just a moment, but I wanted to share as well, in the market for 2 years, really 18 months, this time frame that I'm sharing with you, we kept that look and feel very constant, and we expect to do that for a long time. What we have evolved is our messaging and positioning around some of that. So for example, in 2017, a number of national players exited the public exchange. There's a lot of consumer fear and uncertainty around that, and we launched an evolution of our campaign called We Care About Here. You'll see some of that in the reel. And building on that going into this year, we went back to, in some ways, what is a classic component of Blue Equity. Big open access type of system offers a lot of choice, but we also tied that into more of the emotional benefits around choice. So some of that will come through in this reel. Let's go ahead.
Having your face tattooed, a lot of people just judge you straight off the bat. It's always funny when I take Issa to school, all the other parents and teachers see me and they're just tripping out. In a tattoo shop, everyone's welcome. Bringing Issa into this world, she got to see all kinds of characters coming in and out. I think it's good to have her exposed to all that, being able to see everyone getting along and treating everyone like family. It's cool to just kind of experience those things together.
We are surrounded by infinite possibilities. It's up to us to see the choices we have and summon the courage to make them. For when it comes to our life, our health, every choice we make matters.
So one thing I forgot to describe going into that, for each of the individuals that you saw, like LaToya is here, Adir is here, we ran these spots, storytelling, but talking about their experience. LaToya was a professional dancer during the day, security guard at night. Adir talked about his struggle with addiction. There was just a kind of series of stories that went along with the clips that you saw here. We also talked with small business owners. The boxing gym was a story about a guy that was trying to keep his business afloat. Through all of that, we made an extra effort in thinking about media placements and how we engaged employees. So part of it is just pure internal environmental branding, bringing the brand into all of our office locations. We're statewide. Some of it is much more around how we're engaging with employees. We have a lot of, as many companies do, resource groups. We've got, for the entire population, we're 6,500 employees. We're launching basically one new resource group a year over the last several years and working with them to participate in community events, help bring the brand to life. Some of our sponsorship activities has also played a key role. The initial results from this should go, here we go. In the 18 months that we've been really out in the market with our media, we've generated 3 billion impressions. We have increased ad awareness significantly, much harder lift to get unaided awareness up. And again, we had been dark in the market, but we are seeing those percentage points tick up as well. The overall approach, and here you're seeing sort of like the glossy advertising, but we're carrying it through all of our marketing and touch points, has had very positive impact on likelihood to consider and recommend, as well as the perceived value of the brand. The last statistic here is, the wording is actually a company I'd be proud to work for. And it has been playing a role in our recruitment efforts. We've seen a significant lift there, as well as in our internal Great Place to Work scores, a 10 percentage point increase, because we really worked the brand together with investments in employees and the role that they had played in helping to turn the company around. So those things were working together to achieve that. But I mentioned earlier that the kind of upper mid-funnel piece of all this is really just scratching the surface, and I really meant that. So while a lot of this has been kind of bringing you along with what we were going through as a company and how we expressed it, by far the most impactful but important work is in front of us. And the way that we're tackling that is through the brand work. We've really gone through a lot of internal dialogue. We've taken the core values of the brand expression you saw here. We're actually midstream with talking to employees about simplifying a set of 7 very corporate sounding company values, customer-centric, those kinds of words, into 3 that will be more motivating, hopefully prompt people to take risks, keep people grounded in the mission. There's basically 3 values that we will roll out. Much more importantly, they become a springboard for conversations about where do we go in terms of product design? How can we use the brand as part of the investments we're making in innovation. We recently hired a chief innovation officer. For those of you familiar in classic innovation process and human-centered design, there are these upfront phases that are all around empathy and defining the problem that you're trying to solve and the end user experience. Huge opportunity for brand to play a role in that part of the process. We continue to redesign our end-to-end processes, everything from claims to enrollment to, from a marketing standpoint, the one we're truly accountable for is communication. Like many incumbents in this space, if you try to get your arms around all of the internal departments that may communicate directly with members, system-generated communications, vendors that play a role in communicating, it's a beast. And we're recognizing that marketing as a discipline has so much work that it can do to improve the experience our members are having just through how we're communicating, that we're investing heavily there as well. And then content. There's been some talk today about investment in content and content marketing. That's huge for us. We've launched a content hub just in the last 3 months with the intent to continue to build it out over time. So I think this part will be ultimately more important for the company than a brand advertising campaign can be. But in many ways, that external focus on who we are as a company and how we were showing up is how we're getting here. And it's garnered a lot of momentum internally, which was kind of the point. With that, this is it for presentation, but I would love to talk with any of you on questions that you have.
We have time for some questions.
I don't need that. Yeah, you do. Yeah, I do. I want to get you on. Okay. It's not.
Everybody's on the record.
All right. It's not really a question. Just a comment on the creative and the imaging. It's fabulous. Black and white. Fabulous. The people. Fabulous. The imagery. So congratulations to you and your team. You did a
Thank
great
you.
job.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm really curious about the. I'm curious, since you have such stark new branding, and I know in talking to you, you put such an emphasis on the coherence of that branding across all of your properties, and now as you're starting to move to the product piece, customer service and things like that, how are you, and I know that's a work in progress,
yes,
but I think one of the things that we learned from the D2Cs is that customer service is branding. It's one of the strongest forces of branding in the whole D2C phenomenon. We started learning this years ago with Zappos, because they famously used to say, we've spent 12 hours on the phone with a single customer.
Yeah.
So that kind of learning and understanding that, I'm curious, as you're going into that piece, how are you communicating with your own employees about how this translates into everyday conversations with patients and customers?
Great question. In multiple ways. So, you know, it's more than, to your point, rewriting a script or redesigning an IVR. And not that those things don't require investment and focus, they always do. But it's really in shifting mindset, very much a work in progress in terms of getting to the front line. I think we're at that stage where we have the buy-in across leadership, and the leverage comes from frontline employees taking more pride in the company and living up to the image that we've put out there. I think that, you know, when you get into specific types of capabilities, there needs to be training involved. There needs to be a push on, you know, it's not just about the phone lines. We've got to really rethink the ways in which we use social as a channel. There are other types of investments in terms of just aggregating the data and the systems to empower frontline staff. So it's one of the barriers to a positive customer experience when it is over the phone often is just like disparate pieces of information about who you're talking to. And the more that we are able, we're sort of building on the technology upgrade now with data strategy, but the result of that will be very impactful for frontline when they're interacting. They will simply know more about the member they're speaking to than they have in the past.
I have loads of questions myself. You mentioned your content hub. Could you tell us what the strategy is there? What sort of content should you as a brand be publishing? Is it mainly about your product, or do you see yourself having a larger publishing role for this vast, for healthcare content consumers who are voracious?
Yeah, it's an exciting space. So we actually partnered with the New York Times in our first wave of work around the Content Hub and their T-Brand studio, and continue to work with Butler Shine on some of this as well. But the belief is that when you think back to that insight I described in focus groups of consumers really feeling that they are on their own, the system isn't working for them, but yet they are hungry for information. When you're on the payer side, the health plan, insurance company side of things, you are always faced with that reality that it is the way that many consumers experience cost in the industry is through their insurance premiums. And they want more, understandably. So we actually called the hub Get More. We started by centralizing, there are really like vast arrays of relevant content for members. They want information about health conditions. They want information about what to talk to their doctors about, treatments and procedures. Sometimes that's very fragmented between what they get directly from the doctor's office, what they go online and research. And part of our role can be to point them towards resources as well as simplifying the search for that. So it's a content-rich space. The work is really in breaking it down in a way that will be engaging, and organic search over time will have to play a huge role in that as well.
Thank you. My name is Dennis Sulier with Univision Communications, and enjoyed your presentation and your creative, really wonderful.
Thank you.
Question, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but for those Medicare Advantage patients that you depend on quality score ratings with CMS, have you been able to have that metric measured and as it relates to the engagement campaign?
We haven't been able to tie, say, like Medicare stars to this in particular. I will say that the work has improved perceptions of us in terms of quality. So what people that see us out there believe that if you're going to engage in that way, that you are going to invest in quality generally. But I can't take any credit for the increase that we are making. We are seeing increases in our quality scorings, but that is very hard hands-on work with providers, and much of it is around charting and filling care gaps. The role that marketing can play isn't this so much as how do you communicate much more effectively around care gaps? Often consumers just get a letter from a doctor or an insurance company saying, you really should go take this test, or trying to close gaps in that way. It's not meaningful for the patient, the member, the consumer.
Kimball, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to break for lunch now. We're going to break for lunch now. Before we do a little preview this afternoon, we're going to sort of shifting a little bit more towards messaging this afternoon. We're going to talk about a fascinating multi-channel and multicultural campaign and how that was executed across channels. But then we'll also be talking about the social channel and how we can navigate that thorny but very promising channel. And then we're going to end by focusing on the thing that we've sort of been talking about in part all day, improving creative, which we've been seeing great examples of, and we're going to be talking about that as a topic later this afternoon. Lunch is being served in the next room. If you simply go out this door, loop around, and there's a buffet there that you can go 2 lines on either side, and you're free to bring your lunch back in here and have it, and we'll be back at 2 o'clock to start up the afternoon.